Life in the quiet suburban neighborhood had always been serene for the Montgomery family. A white picket fence, a well-maintained lawn, and children playing in the streets. Everything was picture perfect. For Sarah and Thomas Montgomery, it was the life they had always dreamed of. After years of city living, they had found a small piece of peace in this charming, tree-lined corner of the world. Their two kids, Emma and Luke, were typical teenagers, enjoying the simplicity of suburban life. And then there was Ryan, their 18-year-old son, who had always kept to himself. Ryan was a quiet, introspective young man, more at home with his books than with the usual teenage crowds. What the neighbors didn't know, and what Ryan never liked to talk about, was the shadow looming over him. His father was the sheriff. But in this small town, that was a detail Ryan kept to himself. After all, no one wanted to be labeled as the sheriff's kid. The last thing Ryan needed was more attention. He had learned early on how to blend into the background, to let his father's role take precedence, and to avoid standing out in the neighborhood. But lately, things had been different. The Montgomerys had received more and more letters from the Homeowners Association, HOA, demanding this or that, making absurd requests about things they never thought would be an issue. First, it was the mailbox that didn't meet visual standards. Then, it was a question about the type of shrubbery they had planted in their front yard. The HOA, once a minor inconvenience, had slowly morphed into a silent antagonist in their lives. It wasn't until Sarah received an email late one Thursday evening that the Montgomerys realized just how far the HOA's reach would go. The email was short, curt, and filled with bureaucratic language that made Sarah's blood boil. Violation of community regulations. Excessive vehicle parking in the driveway, it read. The violation in question. Ryan had parked his old truck in the driveway, as he had done countless times before. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, nothing that should have triggered the HOA's attention. But the language in the email hinted at something more insidious. There was an undertone of threat that made Sarah uneasy. "They're getting worse," she muttered under her breath, staring at the screen. "They can't just let us live our lives in peace anymore." She shook her head, wondering why the HOA was suddenly so invested in their every move. Thomas, always the more pragmatic of the two, wasn't too concerned. "They've sent us emails before. Nothing's come of it," he said, dismissing her worries with a shrug. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The next day, Sarah tried to put it out of her mind. The kids had their own plans. Ryan was at work, and Thomas had left for his usual rounds. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that the unexpected knock came at the door. Sarah was in the kitchen, her hands busy with dinner preparations, when she heard the sharp rattle of the doorbell. She wiped her hands on the apron and opened the door, expecting perhaps a delivery or a neighbor in need. But standing on the doorstep was a man in a sharply pressed suit, a pair of dark sunglasses covering his eyes. His presence was imposing, as though he had walked straight out of a movie. Behind him, the faint outline of an SUV could be seen parked at the curb. It was black, tinted windows reflecting nothing but shadows. "I'm Officer Dylan Calloway, HOA Enforcement Division," the man announced in a gravelly voice, his tone clipped and formal. "We've received multiple complaints regarding the property's compliance with community standards." Before Sarah could respond, he stepped forward. "I need to conduct an inspection. It's an official HOA matter. Please step aside." The words hit her like a punch. HOA Enforcement Division. Sarah blinked in confusion. Wasn't the HOA just a group of neighbors with an excessive amount of time on their hands? "Wait, you're a police officer?" she asked, her voice trailing off as she tried to make sense of what was happening. Officer Calloway gave her a tight smile. "No, ma'am. I'm here on behalf of the HOA. Now, if you'll let me through." His tone was calm, but there was an edge to it, something that set off a primal alarm in Sarah's mind. Something didn't add up. Who was this man, really? Why was he so insistent on barging into their home, on enforcing these bizarre regulations? And why did he carry himself with the same confidence as someone who held more power than just an HOA enforcer? "I'll need to see your credentials," Sarah said, her voice steady but wary. Her instincts were kicking in. Officer Calloway paused, eyes narrowing. But then, almost too smoothly, he handed over a badge. It was official-looking, shiny, pristine, a piece of paper that didn't mean much when you were already doubting the whole story. Still, Sarah accepted it, inspecting it closely, but something nagged at her. There was a story here, and she was about to uncover it. What she didn't know, however, was just how far the HOA and this mysterious Officer Calloway would go to get what they wanted. And more importantly, she had no idea that her son Ryan would become a key player in this unfolding drama. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying the video so far, make sure to hit that like button, share it with friends, and subscribe for more awesome content. And while you're at it, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. All right, let's keep going. Sarah Montgomery stood at the front door, the badge in her hand, still unsure whether she should be feeling outraged or just plain confused. The man before her, Officer Dylan Calloway, was dressed in a dark suit that screamed authority, though something about the whole situation didn't sit right. The glossy badge seemed too polished, its edges sharp, like it had never been touched. "Ma'am," Calloway said, his voice smooth but cold, "I'm here to conduct a full inspection of your property. As per HOA regulations, you've received multiple complaints that need addressing." Sarah's heart sank. Complaints? She hadn't received any calls, no notices, no warnings, nothing except that one vague email about the truck in the driveway. Yet this man, who claimed to be from the HOA Enforcement Division, was standing on her doorstep with an air of finality, as though he was the judge, jury, and executioner all in one. "But," she started, trying to find her voice, but Calloway cut her off with a raise of his hand. "Please, ma'am, this is not a discussion." His eyes glinted behind his sunglasses, sharp and calculating.
"The HOA has sent several notices about violations that, if left unaddressed, will escalate to fines or further action. I'm here to ensure compliance." A cold wave of disbelief washed over Sarah. This wasn't how the HOA worked. The last time,
she checked, the HOA only dealt with minor things like lawn care or minor architectural changes, nothing that warranted this kind of police-like intrusion. It felt off, and yet part of her couldn't help but feel a need to comply. After show.
What could she do? He had a badge, didn't he? "Look, I don't understand," Sarah said, her voice growing firmer. "We haven't had any formal notices beyond the email, and don't worry about the details," Calloway interrupted again, his tone suddenly chilling. "I'm here to do my job, and your cooperation is required. Now, if you could please step aside." He stepped forward, the faint scent of cologne mixing with the cold air between them, as if he were expecting her to just comply. Something shifted in Sarah's gut. Every instinct screamed that something wasn't right, but the doubt still clung to her. Who did this man think he was? Her eyes flicked to the black SUV parked outside, its windows darkened, giving off an unsettling, almost intimidating presence. It looked more like an unmarked police vehicle than any vehicle she would have ever associated with an HOA representative. She forced herself to step back. "I'll need to see your credentials," she said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I've been dealing with HOA issues for years, and this doesn't feel like—" Calloway's lips twisted into a tight smile, and he extended a hand to take back the badge. "You've already seen them, ma'am. You'll be fully compliant if you just follow the process. Now, if you don't mind, I'll begin my inspection." Before she could protest further, he shoved the door open with a force that made her take a step back. Panic flared in her chest as he moved past her, not even giving her the decency to step aside. He walked briskly into the foyer, his footsteps echoing through the empty hallway like a predator on the hunt. "Excuse me," Sarah called after him, her voice a mix of surprise and frustration. "What exactly are you inspecting?" "Everything," Calloway replied curtly without turning around. "The front yard, the garage, any vehicles in your possession, and the condition of your fences. We've had multiple reports of excessive parking, violations of fence height regulations, and improper landscaping. He turned to her with a sharp look, as though daring her to challenge him. If you don't comply, I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter to legal action. You wouldn't want that, would you? The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. Legal action, over her son's truck, over a small front yard garden she'd worked hard to cultivate. This wasn't just about enforcement anymore. This was about power, his power, and the HOA's. And suddenly, it felt like they were using that power to push her, to intimidate her into submission. Escalate? Sarah repeated, her voice tight with disbelief. For what? A truck in the driveway? I don't understand. I'm happy to work with you, but this seems excessive. Calloway's smile deepened into something almost predatory. He turned slowly to face her. Excessive? You'd be surprised what people will report, Mrs. Montgomery. A little too much grass here, a truck parked too long there. It all adds up, and now it's my job to make sure you comply. Sarah stood frozen in the entryway, a chill creeping up her spine. She was confused, unsettled, but most of all, she was beginning to feel the weight of something far darker than she could have imagined. This wasn't just an HOA visit. It was a power play, and it was only just beginning. She clenched her fists, the tension thick in the air. She needed to think fast. But just as she was about to say something, the front door slammed open, and Ryan stepped into the hallway. His eyes flickered between her and Calloway, his expression unreadable. "What's going on here?" Ryan asked, his voice steady but laced with confusion. Calloway's eyes narrowed, focusing on Ryan for the first time. A brief flicker of something dangerous passed through his gaze before he straightened up, adjusting his sunglasses. "Your son?" Calloway asked, his tone colder now. "Seems like we're going to have more to discuss after all, Mrs. Montgomery." The tension in the room doubled, and Sarah felt a sharp, rising panic in her chest. The last thing she wanted was for Ryan to get tangled in this mess. But in that moment, she realized something important. This wasn't just about an inspection anymore. This was a test of their limits, and Calloway was about to take it further. "Ryan," Sarah said softly, her voice trembling, "get back inside." But Ryan didn't move. The air in the hallway had grown thick with an unspoken threat. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as Ryan slowly stepped forward, his eyes flicking between her and the man in front of them. She had wanted to protect him from this, whatever this was, but now it was too late. The moment Ryan entered, everything shifted. Calloway's eyes sharpened, like a wolf sensing an opportunity, and Sarah instinctively took a step toward him, trying to shield Ryan without thinking. "Ryan, go back inside," she said, her voice strained, but Ryan's gaze stayed locked on Calloway. "What's going on?" Ryan asked again, his voice low, controlled, as though he were trying to decipher a riddle that didn't make sense. His body was still, but the tension radiating from him was palpable. Sarah could feel the pressure building, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. This wasn't just about a truck in the driveway anymore. Calloway's lips curled into a thin smile, but his eyes were cold, cold like the steel of handcuffs. "I think you're the one who's going to need to go inside, son," he said, the words dripping with a subtle malice. Sarah's stomach twisted. There was something about the way Calloway spoke, like he was speaking to a child rather than an adult. It made her blood run cold. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice rising in frustration. "He hasn't done anything wrong. You can't just—" But Calloway wasn't listening anymore. In a swift motion, he reached out, grabbed Ryan by the arm, and yanked him toward the door. "Let go of him!" Sarah shouted, stepping forward, but she wasn't fast enough. Calloway's grip was like iron, unyielding, and his other hand shot out to block her path. "Stay back," he hissed, his voice now laced with a dangerous edge. "This doesn't concern you." Ryan, completely caught off guard, stumbled backward, trying to pull his arm away, but Calloway didn't let up. "What the hell is this about?" Ryan asked, his voice edged with confusion and anger. His pulse quickened, but his feet remained, planted on the ground as if waiting for an explanation that would never come. Sarah's breath hitched in her throat as she watched her son being dragged toward the door like a criminal. She had never felt so helpless in her life. "Stop!" she cried, but it was too late. Ryan's feet left the ground for a split second as Calloway yanked him outside with surprising force. The sound of his sneakers scraping across the floor sent a sickening chill through Sarah's bones. "No!" she screamed, rushing toward them. But before she could make it to the door, Ryan was already outside, Calloway gripping him tighter with every step. She was right behind him now, her heart hammering in her chest as her eyes darted to the black SUV parked at the curb. Everything about this felt wrong. Ryan fought to break free, his face contorting with frustration. "What are you doing? Let me go!" he shouted, but Calloway simply shoved him harder toward the street. Sarah stepped outside, her mind racing for a plan. Her instincts screamed at her to do something, anything, but all she could do was watch, helpless. And then, as if the whole neighborhood had been waiting for the signal, a small crowd began to gather on the sidewalks, drawn out of their houses by the commotion. Their eyes flickered between Sarah, Ryan, and Calloway. Whispers spread like wildfire. It felt like the whole world was watching, and yet Sarah felt completely alone in that moment. "Calloway, what the hell is this about?" Ryan demanded again, his voice hoarse, the adrenaline starting to push his words faster. "Why are you doing this?" But Calloway was relentless. His fingers tightened around Ryan's arm, his grip unyielding. "You're coming with me, kid. You're under arrest for suspicion of property damage and trespassing." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What? What are you talking about?" She yelled, stepping forward once again, but she was stopped by the looming presence of Calloway's SUV, the windows still dark, like an unmarked police vehicle. It felt like they were part of some twisted charade, the whole thing designed to intimidate and confuse. Ryan shook his head, looking at her in disbelief. "I haven't done anything," he shouted, but Calloway didn't budge. Instead, the fake officer dragged him another few steps before turning back to Sarah. "You're not listening, ma'am," Calloway said, his voice low and deadly calm. "This doesn't concern you anymore. Your son is going to answer for what he's done." The words hung in the air like an ominous warning, and Sarah felt her world shatter. She had no idea what was happening, why it was happening, or how deep this had already gone. All she knew was that her son, her baby, was being treated like a criminal for something he didn't even understand. "Mom?" Ryan's voice cracked. As Calloway dragged him toward the SUV, his voice barely audible, almost as if he were asking for a lifeline. The crowd stood in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. No one stepped forward to help. No one moved. Sarah's thoughts raced, spinning with confusion and fear. What did they think he did? She was sure Ryan had done nothing wrong, but the look on Calloway's face told her this was more than just a simple misunderstanding. Something was deeply wrong, and she was running out of time. As Ryan was forced into the SUV, Sarah felt the weight of the situation hit her like a freight train. The storm was just beginning, and nothing was going to be the same. The black SUV was already halfway down the street when Sarah's mind finally snapped into focus. She stood frozen in the driveway, staring after it, her heart thundering in her chest. Ryan's shouts still echoed in her mind. "I haven't done anything! Mom, help!" She wanted to run after the vehicle, to break through the suffocating barrier of confusion and fear that had descended on her, but her legs felt like stone. This didn't make sense. None of it did. Without thinking, she reached for her phone, dialed 911, and pressed it to her ear with trembling fingers. "1. What's your emergency?" "I need help," she gasped, breathless. "My son has been taken. He's been dragged off the property by someone claiming to be an HOA officer, but I don't think he's a real cop. He's He's just taken him." "Ma'am, slow down," the dispatcher said, her voice calm but firm. "Tell me your location, and we'll send someone to help. Did you say this officer isn't real?" "Yes." Sarah's voice cracked, her pulse racing. "He doesn't have a badge. He doesn't have proper identification. He's not a cop. He's lying. And now my son is with him. Please, you have to do something." "Ma'am, we've had a few reports about an HOA-related incident in your neighborhood. I'll escalate this to our officers. Stay where you are, and do not engage with the individual. Help is on the way." Sarah ended the call, but her hands shook, so violently she couldn't hold her phone properly. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to stay calm, though her mind screamed at her to run, to do something, anything. But as she stood there, breathless, a new thought struck her. What if Calloway wasn't just a fake cop? What if he was more? It clicked, like a puzzle piece snapping into place. Her gaze snapped to the empty street, the dust still settling where the SUV had been. There had been something about his demeanor, his calm arrogance that felt far more sinister than anything a simple HOA officer would display. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. "Mom?" Sarah spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Ryan was standing at the edge of the driveway, his face pale, but he was calm, eerily calm. His body language was measured, like he had everything under control. "Ryan! Oh my God, are you okay?" Sarah rushed forward, grabbing him by the shoulders, her hands trembling. She searched his face, looking for signs of distress, but Ryan's expression was oddly serene. "Yeah, I'm fine, Mom." "It's okay," he said, his voice steady. There was no panic, no fear in his eyes, just a strange, quiet strength that Sarah didn't expect. "What the hell happened?" Sarah demanded, still half in shock. "Where did they take you? What did he want with you?" Ryan paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He hesitated, as if weighing whether or not to say anything, then finally spoke. "That guy, Calloway, he wasn't a cop, Mom. I knew that the moment I saw him." Sarah froze, her mind reeling. "You knew? Then why didn't you say something sooner? You're telling me you knew?" Ryan's eyes met hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah saw a flicker of something deeper, something she hadn't fully realized until that moment. The calm, the quiet control, it wasn't fear he was hiding. It was something else. "I didn't want you to get scared," Ryan replied quietly. "But I've been dealing with people like him before." "Dealing with people like him?" "Ryan, what are you talking about?" Ryan shifted his weight, then looked over his shoulder as if checking the street for any lingering threats. The SUV was long gone now, but something about the moment felt unsettlingly far from over. "Mom," Ryan began, lowering his voice to a near whisper. "You don't know this, but I'm not just some kid around here. I'm not just your son." Sarah blinked, confused. "What do you mean? What are you talking about, Ryan?" Ryan took another breath, his eyes darting around cautiously. "I'm the sheriff's son, Mom." For a long moment, Sarah just stared at him, the words not fully processing. Her mouth went dry, and her heart skipped a beat. "The sheriff's son?" she echoed, barely able to believe what she was hearing. "But you've never mentioned anything about this. Why didn't you say something?" Ryan glanced down for a moment, a mixture of guilt and hesitation flashing across his face. "I wasn't supposed to. I didn't want anyone to know. Not until I was ready. But right now, it's important you understand who I am. That man, Calloway, he's been working for the HOA. He's not just some overzealous officer. He's part of something bigger." The revelation hit Sarah like a thunderclap. Her son, the quiet, mild-mannered teenager she thought she knew so well, wasn't just another resident in their neighborhood. He was the sheriff's son. And now she was realizing that all of this, every single detail of this twisted encounter, had been planned from the very beginning. The pieces were slowly coming together in Sarah's mind, but they only raised more questions. Why would the HOA send a fake cop? What was the real agenda behind this man's actions? Before Sarah could speak, Ryan cut her off. "We need to get to the bottom of this, Mom. And I can't do it alone." Sarah's hands were shaking as she pulled her phone out of her pocket once more. Her head was spinning. The world around her felt like it was tilting at a strange, unnatural angle. Ryan was the sheriff's son. The revelation had cracked open a door in her mind, letting in a flood of new fears, new possibilities. "Mom?" Ryan's voice broke through her thoughts, pulling her back into the present. He was standing a few feet away, his expression tight. But there was an undeniable undercurrent of determination in his eyes. "We need help," Sarah said, her voice steady but low. "I'm calling your dad." Ryan didn't protest. He simply nodded, as if this was all part of a plan he'd been quietly formulating for far longer than she had realized. Sarah quickly dialed the number she knew by heart, one she had never thought she'd need to use in a situation like this. "Sheriff's office, how can I help you?" The dispatcher's voice came through, calm, professional. "This is Sarah Miller. I need to speak to my husband, Sheriff Miller, immediately," she said, her voice clipped with urgency. "It's about a serious situation here. There's a man pretending to be an HOA officer, and he's involved in something illegal. They've taken Ryan and—" "Ma'am, slow down," the dispatcher interrupted, her tone now more serious. "I'll transfer you to him. Stay on the line." The line went quiet for a beat, the silence only deepening the tension in Sarah's chest. The seconds ticked by, slow and heavy. She didn't know what to expect when Ryan's father arrived, but something told her this wasn't going to end easily. The stakes had just been raised, and everything was spiraling out of control faster than she could comprehend. Then, finally, the familiar voice of her husband broke through the static. "Sarah?" "Honey, it's happening. That guy, Calloway. He's not who he says he is. He's been lying to us, and now he's dragged Ryan into this. He's been trying to take control of this neighborhood. There's something bigger going on here. Please, you have to come. I'm on my way." The sheriff's voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the urgency underneath. "Stay put, and keep Ryan safe. We'll get this sorted out. Don't do anything without backup. Please hurry," she pleaded, her grip tightening on the phone. "We don't know what he's really after." "I'm coming, Sarah. Stay inside." "We're on our way." The line went dead, and Sarah felt the weight of the moment crash over her. She turned to Ryan, her heart racing. "We're going to be okay. Your dad's coming. He'll take care of this." Ryan nodded, but the look in his eyes told a different story. "I hope so, Mom," he said quietly, his voice tense. "But this is bigger than we thought. I'm not sure they'll just let us walk away." As the minutes ticked by, Sarah felt her anxiety rise. She kept scanning the street, her eyes darting back and forth as she waited for the sheriff's vehicle to arrive. But the longer she stood there, the more she realized how alone they were. The street was still eerily quiet, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. No more SUVs, no more HOA officers. The calm before the storm. Suddenly, a black SUV appeared at the end of the street. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. "Is it them?" She squinted, her eyes narrowing. It was the same make, the same dark windows, but something was off. This wasn't Calloway's vehicle. The car slowed down as it neared, then came to a stop just outside her driveway. The sheriff's vehicle. The door opened, and a figure emerged from behind the wheel. It was Sheriff Miller. But instead of rushing toward her, he stood still, his eyes scanning the scene with a practiced wariness. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the quiet authority that Sarah had always admired, but now there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something deeper. Something troubled. "Dad," Ryan called, his voice breaking the tense silence. He was moving forward before Sarah could even stop him. The sheriff's gaze locked onto his son's, but there was no visible emotion, only cold determination. "Stay where you are, Ryan. I need to make sure this is handled properly." Calloway's SUV was still nowhere to be seen, but Sarah could feel the threat lingering, like a storm cloud ready to burst. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears as her husband walked toward her, every step measured, every movement deliberate. "So, what's the deal?" the sheriff asked, his voice calm but laced with tension. "Where's this so-called officer?" "I don't know," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "He's been taking people, threatening them, using fake authority. He's been trying to push through some bogus HOA laws. I'm telling you, something's not right here." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. He didn't say a word, but Sarah saw the flicker of realization pass over his face. "That's why I'm here," he muttered under his breath. "Get inside, Sarah. Ryan, stay close to your mom." Before Sarah could even react, the sheriff reached into his jacket, pulling out his radio and speaking into it with military precision. "I need backup. Now. We have a fake officer in play. Here, I need to lock this area down." The tension ratcheted up another notch. In that moment, Sarah realized that everything she thought she understood about this situation was wrong. Calloway wasn't just an ordinary threat. He was part of a larger, more dangerous game. And they were just beginning to see how deep the hole went. As the sheriff's backup arrived, Sarah's heart raced. This was only the beginning. Whatever Calloway was involved in, it was much bigger than any of them could have imagined, and Sarah had a horrible feeling that they were about to find out just how dangerous it was. The air was thick with tension, suffocating in its stillness. Sarah stood in the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the sheriff square off with the fake HOA officers. His presence was commanding, calm, yet there was a sharpness to his every movement. His boots clicked against the asphalt. As he paced in front of the SUV, his jaw clenched, his eyes hard with purpose. Ryan stood beside her, just as still, but there was a nervous energy in him that she could feel. He didn't say anything, but she could see the wariness in his eyes. The situation had escalated beyond their control, and it was no longer just about their neighborhood. This had become something much larger, something dangerous. The moment of reckoning was here. Calloway, the so-called officer, stood across from the sheriff with a forced calm, but his posture was stiff, his hands twitching at his sides like he was unsure of how to proceed. He wasn't alone. A second man, wearing the same unmarked uniform, lingered just behind him, watching the sheriff with a mix of disdain and fear. "Well," the sheriff said, his voice low but heavy with authority, "this is the part where I get to tell you how this is going to go." Calloway's lips curled into a tight, insincere smile. "You can't do anything, Miller. You're just the sheriff. This is HOA business." "HOA business?" the sheriff scoffed, shaking his head. "This is trespassing, and I'm willing to bet the only thing you have in your hand is a fake badge and some illegal papers." Calloway's expression faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. "I'm a licensed enforcement officer. You have no right to interfere with this." "I don't know where you got that license, but it doesn't matter," the sheriff replied, his voice now tinged with anger. "You're not a cop, and you have no legal authority here. You've been operating under false pretenses, and that makes you nothing more than a criminal." The second man, standing silently behind Calloway, stepped forward, his body tense. "You're outnumbered, Sheriff. We don't need your permission. We're here to enforce HOA policy." Sarah's stomach churned as the situation unfolded. This wasn't just about some petty neighborhood dispute. These men were pretending to be something they weren't, and they were getting away with it. For how long? How many others had they manipulated before? The sheriff didn't flinch. "Let's get something straight. I don't care what policies you think you're enforcing. If you step onto my property again, if you touch one of my people..." He paused, his voice deadly quiet. I'll charge you with impersonating a law enforcement officer. And I'll make sure you never see the light of day again." Calloway's bravado faltered just for a second. It was enough. Sarah saw the panic flash across his face before he could hide it. The sheriff had him pinned, had put him in a corner, where his options were few and his lies exposed. But the tension didn't stop there. The second officer, growing more anxious, pulled something from inside his jacket. A small metallic device that glinted in the dim light. Sarah's breath caught. "What is that?" Before she could make sense of it, the officer pointed it at the sheriff. A sudden crackle of static, then a sharp click, followed by a low hum. "Step back," the officer barked, his voice shaky. "I'm giving you one last warning. Move and we'll make you." The sheriff's eyes never left the officer's face. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately, and the tension in the air was so thick it was almost unbearable. "That's a stun gun," the sheriff said flatly, eyeing the device. "Nice try, but it's not going to save you." The officer's finger tightened around the trigger, his face flushed with desperation. Sarah could see the hesitation in his eyes. He didn't know if he was willing to pull the trigger. He didn't know what the consequences would be if he did. "Enough," the sheriff said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. His hand was on his own radio, speaking into it in clipped tones. "I've called this in. You're surrounded. You don't get to leave until I've made sure you're behind bars." For a long moment, no one moved. Calloway shifted uneasily, his eyes darting between the sheriff and the second officer. The tension was unbearable, the silence deafening. Sarah could feel her heart in her throat as she waited for the inevitable. The second officer's hand trembled. Finally, he lowered the stun gun, and Calloway let out a tight breath. "Not so tough now, are you?" the sheriff sneered. Calloway's expression darkened, but he said nothing. It was over. The sheriff had taken control of the situation, and the fake officers were no longer in charge. "You're both going to be arrested," the sheriff continued, his voice unwavering, "for impersonating law enforcement, for harassment, for everything you've done here. The game is over." Sarah's breath finally eased, but it didn't fully relax. They had won this battle, but she knew the war wasn't over yet. Whatever these men were part of, whatever they were trying to accomplish, it was far from finished. The sheriff was in control now, but there were still questions, still shadows lingering on the horizon. As the officers were cuffed and taken away, the sheriff's voice cut through the quiet once more, heavy with a realization Sarah hadn't fully grasped until now. "Just wait," he said, his gaze narrowing toward the retreating officers. "This goes deeper than you think." The cold, unforgiving metal of the handcuffs dug into Calloway's wrists as he was led away from the house. Sarah watched from the porch, the weight of everything that had happened settling over her in waves. The sheriff's deputy moved efficiently, his face hard as he ensured the two fake officers were properly secured. The tension that had hung thick in the air for so long seemed to evaporate, but it left behind a residue of unease. Her eyes drifted toward her son, Ryan, who was standing at the edge of the driveway, his face set in a mask of quiet contemplation. Despite the storm that had just passed, he looked unchanged, like a rock amidst the chaos. But Sarah knew better. She could see the way his hands clenched at his sides, the way his eyes flickered between the sheriff's squad car and the handcuffed men. The weight of what had just happened was sinking in for him too. The sheriff, now at the head of the group, nodded to Sarah. "I'll need a statement from you, but for now, I'll get these two off your property." Sarah couldn't speak at first. The adrenaline that had surged through her body had begun to wear off, and she felt the deep exhaustion that followed a fight, both the physical kind and the mental one. She nodded, though, keeping her gaze fixed on Ryan. She hadn't said it yet, but she needed him to understand. Ryan met her eyes, and for the first time that day, he seemed to see her, really see her, beyond the panic and the confusion. The tension between them loosened, if only just. His jaw clenched, his posture straightened slightly. He wasn't the same kid who had stepped outside this morning. He was different. Changed. "Mom." Ryan spoke for the first time since the confrontation, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of something deeper. "They won't come back, will they?" Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to smile. "No, they won't. Not after what the sheriff found. They're done." Ryan let out a slow breath, his shoulders relaxing just a little. But then his eyes narrowed, his gaze hardening once again as he looked toward the departing officers. "Do you think that's it? I mean, there's something more here, isn't there? They were just the tip of the iceberg." Sarah hesitated, the knot in her stomach tightening once more. "I don't know," she admitted quietly. "But I have a feeling this isn't over." The sheriff turned toward them, his eyes still sharp, like a man who'd seen too many things he wasn't allowed to forget. "You're right," he said. "This wasn't just about some HOA officers going rogue. There's a bigger picture, here, one that's going to take some time to unravel." He looked at Ryan, his voice softening just a touch. "Your son's a smart one, Mrs. Montgomery. He's got a good head on his shoulders." Ryan shifted uncomfortably, clearly not used to such praise. "I didn't do anything, Sheriff. I just wanted to help." "Don't sell yourself short," the sheriff replied with a rare, small grin. "You kept a level head when most people would have lost it." A quiet moment passed before Sarah spoke again, her voice firm despite the lingering uncertainty. "We're safe for now. That's what matters." The sheriff nodded, but there was no comfort in his expression. He'd been around long enough to know that safety was always temporary. The storm might have passed, but the clouds were still hanging in the distance, dark and heavy. As the deputy loaded the fake officers into the squad car, Sarah and Ryan stood in silence, both staring at the empty road. The sounds of their own breaths seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness of the afternoon. It was as if the world had paused, holding its breath, waiting for the next move. Finally, the sheriff spoke again, his voice cutting through the quiet. "I've put out the word about those two. The HOA can't cover up what they've done. You'll be hearing from me soon." Sarah nodded, though the weight of his words felt heavier than she was ready for. The sheriff wasn't just talking about local fallout. She knew that. There was a bigger game at play here, and they were only scratching the surface. As the sheriff and his deputy pulled away, Ryan turned to Sarah. There was a look in his eyes, something stronger than before. Something that had been forged in the heat of conflict and tempered in the pressure of standing up for what was right. "Do you think the community will believe it?" he asked, his voice low. "They will now," Sarah said, her voice more confident than she felt. "You've shown them the truth. The people who were behind this won't be able to hide anymore." Ryan didn't respond right away. He just nodded, his gaze lingering on the retreating sheriff's car. The wheels of the investigation were already in motion. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But as Sarah looked at her son, her heart swelled with something more than pride. It was relief. They had survived the storm. But as she looked over her shoulder at the quiet suburban street, she couldn't help but feel that the storm was far from over, and whatever came next, they would be ready. The sun had begun its descent, casting long shadows over the quiet street, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted only hours earlier. Sarah Montgomery stood in the doorway of her home, staring out at the familiar neighborhood. The calm felt almost surreal after the storm they had weathered, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the next shift. Her hand rested on the doorframe, the cool wood grounding her as the weight of everything finally hit. Her thoughts were a swirl of emotions, relief, pride, and a lingering question that wouldn't leave her mind. Was it really over? Ryan stood beside her, arms crossed, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp, constantly scanning their surroundings. She'd noticed the change in him since the moment the sheriff had arrived. He had carried himself differently during the confrontation. Calm, collected, focused. But now, it wasn't just the situation that had changed him. It was the revelation of who he truly was to the community. "I guess they'll be talking about this for a while," Ryan said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, as if he was still processing everything that had happened. "Let them talk," Sarah replied, a quiet confidence in her voice. "The truth came out, Ryan. People saw what happened. They'll remember who stood up when the odds were stacked against us?" Ryan looked down the street, his eyes narrowing for a moment before he spoke again. "It's different now. I'm not just the kid anymore, huh?" Sarah chuckled softly, glancing at him. "No. Now, they know who you really are." Ryan's identity as the sheriff's son had been one of the town's best-kept secrets. The sheriff himself hadn't shared it with anyone, wanting to protect his son from the weight of public perception. But now, with the fake HOA officer's arrest, the truth had come to light. And with it, the realization that Ryan wasn't just a bystander, he was a force to be reckoned with. For years, the family had been overlooked, pushed around by the HOA and other authorities. But now the tables had turned. It was a subtle shift. But it was enough. The power dynamics had changed in their small neighborhood. The community had seen that the Montgomery family wasn't afraid to fight back. Sarah took a deep breath, letting the evening air fill her lungs. "You did good today. We did good. No matter how this plays out, we made a stand. And that's more than a lot of people ever do." Ryan nodded, his gaze lingering on the horizon. "Yeah, I'm proud of what we did. But I know this isn't the end of it. They won't just give up." A moment of quiet passed between them, the weight of his words settling like dust in the air. Sarah wanted to disagree, to tell him that everything would be fine now. But she knew better. There would always be something more. The HOA, the fake officers. There were larger forces at play, and as much as she wanted to forget about it all, she knew that the fight for their home, their rights, had only just begun. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the small victory. The sheriff had promised to investigate the entire operation behind the fake HOA officers, and the family had shown their strength in the face of adversity. That was enough for today. As they stood together on the porch, the first of the neighbors walked by, one of the few who had witnessed the events of the day. He stopped, giving Ryan a nod of respect. "Good work, son," he said with a smile before continuing on his way. Ryan's chest swelled with a mix of pride and disbelief. He wasn't just the sheriff's son anymore. He was someone people respected. Someone who had taken a stand. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a small smile. "You see? People know now. You've earned their respect." He nodded, but there was something more in his eyes, a quiet fire that hadn't been there before. The events of the day had changed them both, had forged a bond between them that was stronger than it had ever been. They had faced down the HOA, faced down those who thought they could push them around, and come out victorious. And as Sarah turned to head inside, she couldn't help but feel a sense of calm settle over her. They were stronger now, not just as a family, but as a unit ready to face whatever came next. They had proven that they wouldn't back down. And with that, the world around them would have to respect them. No more being pushed around, no more silent compliance. The Montgomery family was done being underestimated. The final shot was of the sunset, casting long shadows over the quiet neighborhood. But in the distance, there was a feeling of something more stirring. The tension that had been present earlier in the day was gone, replaced with a quiet, almost unsettling calm. The story may have reached its climax, but as Sarah looked out across the horizon, she knew this was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the next part, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to stay updated. See you in the next one. Your support means the world.